Hello, everybody. My name is Dan, the Jazz Shepherd. Welcome to the channel where we talk primarily jazz with some history and social issues woven in to help give context to what this great art form is about. I got my Tom Waits t-shirt on, which has been washed apparently too many times at this point. But I'm a big Tom Waits fan. You gotta always tip your hat to him once in a while. So we're gonna jump into Prestige catalog real quick here. I'm gonna start you off with some 10-inch stuff. And I don't have a ton of it because so much of it was reissued in the 7,000 sequence, 7,100 sequence, and it's actually pretty rare too to find these old Prestige 10 inches, which makes sense. The old Blue Notes are pretty rare as well. Far more of the Blue Note 10-inch sequence has been repressed, especially by the Japanese, making those much more readily available and even bringing down the cost of the originals. If there's a bunch of copies of Japanese ones for $30, it does affect the price of even the original Blue Notes. They have to come down some to be sold. When you don't have that repress option, it gives you a bit more of a chance to be a pirate and sell for what the market can offer. I just learned this myself, that the Prestige 10-inch sequence and the New Jazz 10-inch sequence are the same thing. And whether or not they started off as New Jazz sequence and switched it to Prestige, because I think most of these New Jazz ones are very early. So I'm not sure exactly on that. And believe it or not, it's kind of hard to find some of this information. Wikipedia doesn't even list the Prestige 10-inch sequence. They have all the New Jazz, Prestige, Swingsville, Woodsville, Bluesville stuff, but they don't list the 10-inch stuff, nor the 78 stuff. There's a great website out there called, I think it's called the Jazz Discography Project, that lists a lot of artists' discographies and label discographies, and it's a work in progress. But it's a great resource, which I use quite a lot when Wikipedia doesn't have what I need. So what I also just discovered here, and you'll see right away what I'm talking about, this is New Jazz 101, which makes it the first 10-inch Prestige New Jazz did. And it's definitely a New Jazz label, definitely a New Jazz record, but apparently it's the same sequence, because when I found on the Discography Project, 101 10-inch series is this record. So whether it's Prestige, New Jazz, or both, not clear. But you'll also see here, which I found kind of insightful, is that what you got here is Lee Konitz on one side and Lenny Tristano on the other. And you got some great players on both records. Warren Marsh, Sal Mosca, Denzel Best, Lee Konitz, Billy Bond, a great guitarist. Shelly Manns on drums on the Tristano record. What's interesting is that this is evidence of this being a reissue of 78 RPM material. Just like you'll often have 2 10-inches compiled onto one long play LP, here Prestige is like, okay, this is the new format, this 10-inch LP. It's the same size as the old 78s, but you can get a lot more information. So let's compile some 78s onto this new format and get some of our prestigious, pun intended, old material out there in this new format. And a lot of the early stuff here on Prestige New Jazz 10-inch sequence is just that. It's stuff from the 78 era. I think Prestige was founded mid-40s. I have to look that up, actually. I'll get back to you on that. I just really quick went and checked, and Prestige was founded in 1949 by Bob Wanstock, as we talked about in the intro episode. If you didn't watch yesterday's intro episode, I'll give you a lot of background on the label in that intro. So check that out before you watch this. But 49, they're founded. So that means that all that 78 material was done in 49, 50, and then compiled on these 10 inches in 50, 51, 52, as that transition happens rather rapidly into the 10-inch LP, which kind of comes around 1950 to 10-inch. The bigger labels had an easier time transitioning, bigger pockets, deeper pockets. The small labels, for some of them, it was a tougher call to make, but the 10-inch LP was obviously going to be the future, so the label started putting this stuff out. And then in short notice, the 12-inch LP shows up, forcing everyone to change their players, everyone to change the size of their storage racks. It was a big transition. Some of the small labels were like, oh, we're not sure we're going to make that change. And RCA and Capitol start pushing in 53, 54 even, and Decca and Columbia. And by 55, all the small labels kind of had to either go the way of the 12-inch LP or go the way of the Dodo Bird, and that's a tough choice sometimes. Blue Note, for example, almost sold their catalog at that point. It was to Atlantic, or was this, I can't remember exactly who it was right now. My mind's getting fuzzy. But Blue Note almost sold out instead of making that transition. Thank goodness they didn't, because we would have lost a lot of Blue Note legacy had they not gone to that 12-inch 1500, 4000 sequence. So I'm only going to show you the 10-inch here I got by Prestige New Jazz. Again, some of the stuff's going to be 78 RPM, as evidenced by that. Number 102. The series starts at 100. It's Stan Getz. And again, you got stuff from multiple sessions here, indicating this was probably from 78 RPM era. You have Stan Getz Quartet with Tony Ailes, a fine piano player, Percy Heath on the bass, and Don Lamond on the drums. On the second two tracks, you have Al Haig, Gene Ramey, Stan Levy, and Stan Getz. So when you have two-track sessions, that's definitely 78 RPM stuff. Then the second session here, Stan Getz with Tenor Sax Stars. There's 4 tracks. And it's got Alan Eager, Brew Moore, Al Cohn, Zoot Sims, Walter Bishop, Gene Ramey, and Charlie Perry. And when you got Getz, Eager, Moore, Cohn, and Sims, you got a lot of that Woody Herman herd. You know, the 4 brothers. And pretty fantastic stuff. And of course, Woody Herman's group was pretty popular at this point. And so these white saxophonists had quite a bit of staying power, and they were quite marketable. Because if you read the Playboy Jazz polls and the all the readers polls and the big magazines, it's the white players that have most of the renown, the recognition, the fame, the fortune. The black players that we all think of today as being the prestigious leaders and innovators, they were very much under the surface. Aside from the guys that Norman Granz had from the swing era, that's Husky sounds. You can't tell a Husky what to do if you don't know. Huskies do what they want to do. But yeah, the Woody Herman band was very popular. Stan Kenton band was very popular. All those musicians in those bands were given the chances to record by various labels. And again, these names were big names to white America, middle America. Only the small inner city enclaves really knew the deeper black jazz. It's important to remember that, but it's hard to see it because of how much we've put importance and transitioned our opinion on the present. We look at all those black guys like the Monks and the Rollins and Coltrane's as being these luminaries that dominated the scene, and that's far from the case. And even more so for the Blue Note kids. Those Blue Note kids were just unknown. But white cats like this, Brew Moore, Stan Getz, Alan Eager, Al Cohn, Zoot Sims, who are probably less known now by a long measure compared to the Coltrane's and Rollins and Monks. These guys were, I'm not sure they were quite, your kids had them on their posters on their doorway, but these were pretty well-known, poll-winning, good-selling artists that were not that risky to record because people knew who they were. So that's number 102. Number 105, we move along here again. I don't have all these by any stretch, is Chubby Jackson. And Chubby Jackson's a very important bass player. He anchored a lot of the great swing bands. He ended up having his own band for quite a long time. From my understanding, he was a fun, flamboyant character, just a real energetic personality in the jazz history books. Here he is on side 1, playing with Howard McGee, Al Porcino, Don Ferreira, and Kai Winding and J.J. Johnson, which is completely a mixed lineup there. A couple Italians and some brothers with Chubby. And then on side 2, we have the great Georgie Auld, who goes back to the Benny Goodman groups. Zoot Sims on tenor, Charlie Kennedy, fantastic. Jerry Mulligan's on the baritone, who's just kind of coming into his own at this point, with Tony Ailes, Chubby Jackson, and Don Lamond. So Chubby's playing with a pretty wide range of the talents of the day and was a pretty big luminary, popular name in those days. And today, Chubby Jackson's completely unknown. You don't see Chubby Jackson stuff posted hardly at all, unless you're Scott Baldwin. Scott Baldwin's the exception to that. This is Roy Eldridge, number 114. And it looks like it's all from one session, perhaps. It's all seems to be uniform. I don't see artists listed on this. I'm going to do a quick open hip here. And as you can see, we have switched to the Prestige logo, which isn't a very common logo. You don't see that one very often. And the back is just blank, which I find peculiar. But so I don't even know who's on that session, and I haven't looked it up yet. You know, if you know me, you know a lot of times if I don't know who's on a record, I'll find out and write it on the sleeve and the plastic, just so I have that information. But this is Gene Ammons. And again, Ammons was another guy who was playing with Billy Eckstine, a big popular swing group that was touring the country. Eckstine would attract a mixed audience, black and white. They were introducing bebop into the sound when you went to see them live. Eckstein was quite the performer and also quite the singer. I've talked to you more about the Unholy Four, which was that great sax section with Dexter Gordon and Gene Ammons and Sonny Stitt and Leo Parker playing the baritone. So it was really quite a flamboyant, energetic bunch when you went to see them. Eckstein would be dancing and the band would be standing up and doing their things, and the sections would be sitting down. Again, there's the blue Prestige print. It doesn't seem to list the band once again here, which I'm saddened by. And again, I think it has... Oh, this one has a back at least. But it doesn't list the band, sadly. It has just a listing of all the other 10-inch LPs that are coming out. Young Gene Ammons, he ended up having quite a bad drug habit. His nickname was Jug, if those of you don't know. And his recording career is interrupted by numerous jail sentences. And there's a period from probably like 62 to about 69 where he's incarcerated for all that length for drugs. Which, A, is a crime on the part of society for to incarcerate someone for that personal choice. There's far more dangerous things you could be doing than doing drugs. And self-medication is a symptom of a problem, not the problem. And the desperation, the stress, the anxiety of all of us, but especially being a young black male, it has to be exhausting. And alcohol is a dangerous thing because alcohol makes you act out in public. And heroin's more of a reclusive thing. You kind of will be in isolation and alone, which helps deal with some of the paranoia and some of the exposure. And you don't really act the fool on heroin necessarily. You might act crazy when you're jonesing and need to, rob somebody's instrument or somebody's wallet, but you're not going to be out in public stumbling around getting arrested necessarily for acting the fool. And so sometimes those type of drugs, marijuana especially, was an option for most black jazz musicians because alcohol, that's not to say a lot of the black guys didn't drink because they sure did, but there was some that were like, I don't really need Louis Armstrong chose herb every day and wasn't much of a drinker from what I remember. But Ammons is a fantastic player, a lot of guts, a lot of soul, a lot of gospel, a lot of blues. And he's got the track Jug, Sirocco, Blue and Sentimental. Wow. I was actually battled Sonny Stitt. That's really cool. I didn't even notice that. It's just that one song. It looks like it says New Blues Up and Down, where he's battling Sonny Stitt on that one track. I need to give that another listen. Fantastic stuff. And you guys know me, I'm a huge, huge Sonny Stitt fan, without any question about it. Now we're going to jump a big 127 to 139. This is Billy Taylor Trio. And so we've gone from those simple text covers to now they're putting some photographs in there. And this is where jazz graphic design was at in 1951-52. All right? The 78 era was just those brown sleeves. You bought your record in a little brown sleeve with no information on it whatsoever. Eventually, some of the labels started putting discographies on those labels and the label logos. But they were very simple paper, thin cardboard that dissolved rather quickly over time. And so when the 10-inch era dawned and there was more information on these records, they were charging more. They started to upgrade the covers, the real jackets and sleeves. I don't think they had paper inserts for quite a while, actually, or even the wax inserts I don't think came. I think initially they were just stuffed in there. And those inserts kind of came along down the road. But Billy Taylor's a great player. People dog on him some because he's so flexible and can do so much that he didn't really have his own sound in some ways. He was a great educator. He was a great television personality that was a very huge ambassador for jazz. And that alone gives him a credential that is beyond a sale. There should be no criticizing or critiquing of Billy Taylor. He's an astounding player that can do everything from boogie woogie to Harlem stride to the swing to the bebop to modern modal. He can do the whole thing, Billy Taylor. His discography is fairly broad. Charlie Smith is on the drums, Earl May is on the bass, and this, of course, gets compiled onto the 12-inch era, of course. Now we're going to jump to 165, so about another 30 titles on from where that was. And now the covers here have taken a bit of a turn for a more graphic design. This is probably by now 54, maybe 53. Charlie Smith and Earl May are still backing him on this. Again, number 165, Billy Taylor. And then there's 168, another Billy Taylor, with a cover that's really kind of hard to make out at this point, but just the three of them kind of in silhouette. And I've talked to you all before about what guys like the great cover maker for Burt Goldblatt, for Roost and Storyville and Bethlehem, those great covers that he was doing over there, the big photographs and the incredible design. That was so cutting edge across the record industry. And remember, rock and roll doesn't really exist yet. Rhythm and blues is just coming into its own. So the music that you were buying in the record store was classical, it was jazz, it was popular, gospel, quiet choral stuff, a lot of Schlitz and schlocky stuff that is landfill. It's garbage, you know what I mean? And so these jazz records there are just treasures. And jazz ends up being the cutting edge, leading edge of graphic design in the entire music industry, led by Burt Goldblatt, led by David Stone Martin for Norman Granz. The last one I'm going to show you here is number 182. This is Hi-Fi Miles Davis All-Star Sextet. And this possibly might have even not been issued at the time. It's got that logo, which is like a maroon version of the fireworks logo, the yellow and gold, the gold and black. I'm thinking this probably did come out in 54 on 10-inch, but sometimes, I know there's a few Blue Note 10-inch that have been tacked on to the end of that sequence that never came out initially in those days. They've been kind of added on for record store days. I think this is probably a real 10-inch. I'm not positive. It's with the Lucky Thompson All-Star Sextet with J.J. Johnson, Horace Silver, Percy Heath, and Kenny Clark. And I think this ends up being on the 12-inch Walkin', is it? But a lot, like I said, most of this Prestige stuff does end up on the 12-inch. So that wraps up this 10-inch little sequence. And it gives you a little bit more information on the label. So Prestige New Jazz, 10-inch stuff are synonymous. I don't know if they both were put out, though, or just they started at New Jazz or went to the Prestige logo. But it's Prestige is really kind of ahead of Blue Note at this point. They're doing some pretty good stuff, pretty modern stuff. I don't think Weinstock had a lot to say about what the Cats were playing. I never really got that impression. I never really read in the liner notes where he interfered or intervened or even had an overarching desire or want for what the sounds were going to be. I think he maybe had some insight as into who were going to be names that mattered and went out and signed some of those guys. And he had, of course, people underneath him that were helping him find that. The musicians would help him find that. The musicians would tell him, oh, you got to look for so-and-so, J.J. John, you got to look for, so he was involved in that aspect, I feel like, from what I've read. But you don't really get the feeling like he was in there meddling with the music or the sounds or the styles or the genres. He seems to be kind of hands-off in that regard, which means that there's some kind of loose, sloppy, crazy, drugged out, blues-driven, and soulful Prestige. Also, there's some stuff that's completely modern and cutting edge. It's a real mix of what's happening in jazz and in the early 50s. And as we get to towards 55, 56, we see Blue Note kind of ascend because they have that finite sound and they know exactly what they want to do. And their alpha's only hiring the young black kids with that fire and that, that social charge. He feels it. He felt the injustice in Germany and saw the war unfold. He saw what the blacks did during the war and coming home to the injustice still afoot in America. And there's an empathy and a sympathy. Like there's a tangible link with Alfred and his Blue Note artists. And he just, I don't think, you got to at some level admit that I don't think Alfred Lyon felt the white players the same way as he felt the black players. And maybe that's a challenging thing to say, but the track record speaks for itself. Post 1956, he doesn't sign a white player as a leader. Not one. Not one. And it might not even be I don't feel the White Cats, or the White Cats, I don't think he does like them. I just felt like he knew that all the other White Cats had plenty of options as to where they could record. And a lot of the White Cats are going to want more money than I'm going to offer them. And so I'm going to let those white guys go to Prestige, go to Verve, go to Columbia, go to Decca, go wherever you have options. Go to Pacific, go to Contemporary, go to Mercury Emerson. I'm going to focus on these black kids who don't have the options. They don't have alternatives. And I don't think that this stuff's going to be popular or it's going to sell very well. And I don't care. I think it's important. I think it matters. And I think it's a big part of that Blue Note legacy, is that singularity of what they were doing really pushed them to the forefront by 56, 57, 58. And again, Prestige, is doing great stuff in that time, you know. But by 56, Miles Davis is signed with Columbia. Coltrane's going to do a few things, and then he's going to move on to Atlantic. Monk is going to move on to Riverside. You know, there's just changes all throughout, constantly in the jazz kingdom. There's no stability in terms of very few artists are sticking around at one place for a long time. Rollins was at Prestige for a while. He moves on to Blue Note, eventually on to other pastures out west. And, you know, it's just constantly these guys are shifting around. And Prestige also doesn't seem to have those career artists like a Blue Note did that were like, I'm not leaving here. This is home to me. Horace Silver didn't leave Blue Note for a couple decades. Lee Morgan left VJ a little bit, came back. Donaldson went to Argo a little bit, then came back. Art Blakey, he's a Blue Note guy. You know, he does a 56, he does a couple days, 57, he leaves for a little bit, comes back 58, and he's Blue Note for forever. You know, Mobley's Blue Note forever. So a lot of these guys, Donald Byrd, once he signed with Blue Note, he was a Blue Note guy forever. Blue Note had this artistic freedom that I think almost supersedes payment in some of these guys' minds. And I'm guessing the pay difference wasn't massive, unless you're talking about Columbia or Capitol. But Columbia and Capitol wasn't lining up to sign Lee Morgan or Hank Mobley or Donald Byrd or some of those really, you know, aggressive Blue Note cats. And it's a bit like an athlete that will settle for less money to win a title. I want to win a championship. I'm not necessarily worried about making a few dollars more. And money is a motivator in life. We need it to feed ourselves, to support ourselves, but by no means is it a barrier or establishment of happiness. You know, I mean, that's one of the real conceits and foolishnesses of our Western philosophies. That money's going to make us happy. You know, it's just a silly notion. Happiness, the contentment of self-exploration, self-expression. These things are where we find self. And when we dam that stuff in and never release it, never express it, that's a concoction for being unhappy. And all the spending and shopping in the world will keep you unhappy because you're always going to want that next thing. It's just such a dangerous cycle to fall into. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that for today. Tomorrow we're going to jump into the 7,000 sequence, starting with the number 7,000, and we'll knock out that first 100. It's a pretty impressive first 100. Again, a lot of it's from this earlier era, but that's fine. You know, it was important to get that canon. Again, Prestige and some of their most important stuff was 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. That's when they were as cutting edge as they probably ever were in some ways. And I think a lot of us get that blurred because even myself, when I'm collecting the 12-inch LPs, a lot of times you lose sight of that so much of this stuff is actually from an earlier date. And so you think, well, wow, Prestige is doing this incredible body of work here in 55, 56, 57. And that's not truly the case. A lot of it's from an earlier period that's being issued on the LP as the LP arrived. And it's coming out concurrently with some new dates. And there are a lot of noteworthy dates still happening. Don't get it twisted, you know. But Prestige really had that prominence and that the most cutting edge stuff I think they did was probably in the early 50s. And again, then by 58, they launched that new jazz sequence. Like, they bring that back. And that 8200 sequence has some pretty cutting edge, important stuff. So that would probably be the other place where Prestige was doing cutting edge, premium jazz, along with what they did in the early 50s. And then the 7000 sequence itself, like I said, kind of moved its way into bigger names and reissues, and then a lot of soul jazz later on, which we'll document coming up. Y'all be safe. You have a great day. We'll talk to y'all soon. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Hit that like button if you want to. If you want to support the channel, you can go to the merch store in the description below. Grab a t-shirt, grab a hoodie, grab a coffee cup. If you want to donate to the channel, you can go to my Patreon and subscribe and donate $5-10 a month, which helps us survive in this cold wilderness called Minnesota that we live in. It's been tough sledding for me trying to find DJ work here. I've done a few sporadic gigs, but nothing's really connected. It's going to be tough for me to make a living here doing it, I think. I might need to just start doing one-offs here and there, but those are so much more stress. Doing a one-off gig, man, it's like you don't really know exactly what the audience wants going in. Bringing vinyl, you kind of limit yourself because this is what I think they're going to want. This is what they told me they want. But oftentimes those people have no idea what their friends and what that crowd's really going to want. I also have my laptop, which has a lot of options on it. But there's just so much more stress doing a one-off thing than doing a regular, that's what I'm looking for, residency, where you're coming to see what I play. You know what I mean? You're not coming here to tell me, yeah, I want you to play this. You're coming because you know I'm going to play good music, and you're interested to hear what I'm going to play. And that's a fun way to play versus the stress of trying to please someone that you don't really know, haven't ever really interacted with much before. And the list of songs they gave you, most of what you've tried from that list hasn't connected with anyone because they didn't really know how to DJ. So it's a tough thing. But I'm not complaining. We're blessed. We have our health. Hopefully the pandemic's kind of winding itself down and going to slip away. And I'm sure it'll resurface in patches and spots. But I'm ready for that to be a thing of the past for sure. Y'all be safe. Much love, much peace. Enjoy the journey. You know, the journey of life is about that exploration, that questioning. And jazz is a great way to delve into yourself because it doesn't have words telling you how to feel, what to think. It's just going to connect with your consciousness. And if you're open, you'll feel what the jazz players are saying to you. But even if you're not open to that, not really susceptible to that, it will still leave your mind without guiding lyrics to tell you what to think. So your mind can open up listening to jazz. It's a great place to think, a great place to explore self. Jazz is a great vehicle for all of that. It's like having a blank sheet of paper and just letting the hand go, you know, and those players can somehow reach into us and help us express and help us find self, which is a pretty cool thing about an art form. Talk to you soon. We'll do that Prestige 1 coming up real quick, 7,000. Talk to you soon. Peace.